Welcome to SALTovation. The SALTovation Show is a podcast series featuring the leading voices in SALT, where we talk about the issues and strategies to help you make sense of state and local tax. Transitioning to the MTC, we've had a couple MTC colleagues, Helen Hecht, as you had previously mentioned, and Brian Hamer have been lucky. We've been lucky enough to have them on the podcast and talk with them. But as a reminder, maybe for any of our new listeners who haven't checked out our catalog, shameless plug, but what is the purpose of the MTC? And, why should states kind of consider following their recommendations?
So I'm going to just be a real nerd here, and I'm just going to read from the Multistate Tax Compact. So again, for those who may not be familiar with the work of the MTC, we are a interstate governmental agency, and the reason we are is because of the Multistate Tax Compact, which currently 16 states have adopted into their state laws. Another 10 or so don't have the compact as part of their laws, but they basically follow the compact. So there are four purposes to the compact, and which creates then the Multistate Tax Commission to administer the work of the compact, and that is to facilitate proper determination of state and local tax liability of multi-state taxpayers, including the equitable apportionment of tax bases and settlement of apportionment disputes. Secondly, promote uniformity or compatibility in significant components of tax systems. Third, to facilitate taxpayer convenience and compliance in the filing of tax returns and in other phases of tax administration. And fourth, to avoid duplicate taxation. So, in addition, I always like to reference our mission statement, which is, to me, another slightly different way to talk about the work of the Commission, and that's threefold. The first thing the mission statement says is to promote uniformity, so there's that focus on uniformity again. Second, to assist taxpayers with compliance. And then third is to advocate for state and local sovereignty over tax policy and tax systems. So that's why we exist. One of the other things about the compact, our members are officially the heads of the departments of revenue across the country, and the compact also mandates that we focus our work on tax types that are multi-state income and franchise and sales and use tax. So obviously states have lots of different taxes and fees that they impose and administer. But for the MTC purposes, our lane, if you will, is this multi-state business type income, franchise, sales, and use tax. So with the focus on uniformity, one of the things we're known for in our now over 50-year history is development of models, statutes, regulations, and other guidance. And because we're government, we do it in a very transparent process. We have a very robust public participation policy. So similar to what you would find in terms of development of state legislation or regulations, every step along the way, we work through meetings through the Uniformity Committee, which has meetings in person, but then we've got right now separate work groups that are established to work on the uniformity projects that we have going, and I know we'll talk a little bit more probably about those. But there's always notice to the public of our meetings and an opportunity to give public comment. Again, that desire for stakeholder input from whoever. And as our model move through the process, they're subject to a public hearing. And then ultimately, if they are adopted by the full commission through a vote, then they're not mandates to the states, but they are recommendations to the states. And that makes sense, circling back to our mission statement, whereas we're promoting uniformity, but at the same time, we recognize each state is its own, sovereign and makes its own decisions about what it's going to do in terms of its individual, tax policy and tax laws. So I know it's an interesting at times people think those two things are maybe somewhat in conflict, or they make it challenging. That on one hand we're promoting uniformity, we want states to adopt as much uniformity as they can. That obviously is beneficial to taxpayers. But at the same time, we have to respect that states will make the decisions that are in their best interest. So does that answer your question about the commission and our work?
It does. Do you think there's ever confusion associated with, right, the idea that the MTC provides model statutes, but it's up to the states? I know from an MTC perspective, Public Law 86272 has gotten a lot of publicity and kind of the modernization. And we're not going to dive specifically into that because we talked about it, with Brian and Helen. But we're finding that there's a lot of confusion that, the MTC put this out, but it's up to the states to adopt it. I think New Jersey, well, California ACMA is a whole other conversation, which we've had. New Jersey has formally adopted that. Do you think there's confusion out there that the states actually have to specifically adopt this into statute? And, how does the MTC go about kind of that like gentle reminder of, yes, uniformity and what you all do is on the website and what that, but how do you like really get that out there
Well,
if you
and you're
can?
asking, yeah. And so you're asking how do we do that as far as with the states
Yeah,
to encourage them? Well, again, from a staff perspective,
right.
we don't lobby, and so I don't know if there's anything that we can do, specifically to say, hey, you should do this, other than, to say when the issue comes up, remember, the MTC, and we will do that from time to time, say, remember the MTC has a model for this. Another one of the topics that's floating out there through the legislature right now concerns mobile workers and remote workers. And so, for a number of years ago, over a decade now, the MTC developed a model with respect to mobile workforce. So those are out there, and all we can do is just do our best to remind states that these exist. And that's one of the challenges too, is that even when the MTC has developed these models, we don't track who adopts them and who doesn't, or in what pieces or parts, because that happens as well. Since they're a model, you might look at a piece of state law and you can see bits and pieces, or they've taken the essence of what's been adopted, or excuse me, or, adopted as a recommendation to the state, and taken pieces and parts of it. You also don't know when a legislature might decide to take up these issues. Again, using the mobile workforce model as an example, that was sitting out there for a long time. I think it was North Dakota was the only state that had adopted any part of it. But now more recently, we've seen like Utah used it as part of their law when they, decided to do something on this front. So that's the other challenge that I see, and just the reality of the work, the world we work in, is that you just don't know when a state might want to take a look at something like this. And that's kind of the beauty of the MTC, that we can say, look, we have something you can look at as a starting point that can help you. But I agree, it's a challenge to help people stay informed and aware that we have all these models. And I think part of that is just you've got turnover in the departments of revenue, that they're just trying to do the best they can with their own state laws, and trying to keep up with their own state, what's going on there, as opposed to how do you keep up with what the MTC might be doing. So and then but I think part of it too is we are trying, I think, in a lot of ways these days to make sure that we are staying connected as staff and as an organization with other organizations that work on these issues. For example, we make sure we go to the Streamline meetings and we're a presence there. And like with our current uniformity project relating to the taxation of digital products, we've got staff from the Streamline states who are ex officio members of our work group, and and we're monitoring what's going on in Streamline more closely. NCSL, National Conference of State Legislatures, has a SALT task force, and so we make sure that we have a presence there so that we can hear what's going on and share what we can to help legislators to understand the work of the commission. So it's an ongoing effort. I don't know that there's ever going to be a perfect way that we can spread the word, but certainly appreciate opportunities again like this with podcasts and the technology that we have today to reach out and talk to people and do the best we can to explain who we are, what we do. Because again, I get it. We're kind of a different group than just a regular trade association or some of the other groups.
As you've talked about the MTC and what it gets involved in, so it does engage in various uniformity projects. And how are those projects selected? And I'm sure a lot of it has to do with like what the members want to understand and all of that. But could you give us a little insight into kind of those uniformity projects and how they come to be, the evolution of, new Public Law 86272?
Sure, be happy to. So, and this is one of those things again, I've said this regularly. I think when Helen Hecht moved into this new role of uniformity counsel, it's really been a game changer, because prior to that in 2020, the uniformity committee's work, they would meet 3 times a year. Again, I remember going to those meetings as a representative from Texas, and that would be the nature of the meetings were to actually work on actual models and such. And so one of the criticisms of the MTC at that time was things move so slowly. But with Helen moving to this role and having somebody on the legal team who was really focused on this, we've been able to improve, I think, the process and how things work. But as far as how the projects are selected, where they come from, yes, it's we are a member-driven organization, and I always want to say, because I hear the voice of our executive director Greg Mattson in my head saying, staff are not the MTC. We are not the MTC. Again, it's the departments of revenue heads and their staff who move, are the people who make the decisions and determine what happens. So one place where these ideas for the and proposals for a uniformity project are, yes, from the members that come forward and say, where we're dealing with this issue, this might be something appropriate for the MTC. And one of the things that Helen set up was this initial standing subcommittee of the Uniformity Committee to initially, if somebody has an idea for a project, have a group that looks at that to say, is this an appropriate project just generally for the MTC? If so, what might be the scope of it that's appropriate? Do we have enough staff? Because we attorneys at the MTC help staff these projects. Do we have enough resources that we can reasonably take on this project? But it really is this reasonable, and does this make sense? So it's member driven, but I also want to make sure it's clear that it can also come from the public, because we've definitely had projects that got started or were supported when taxpayers or practitioners came forward, and 2 that come to mind there were, most recently we had one practitioner come forward and say, I've got clients who really could benefit from a universal power of attorney form, and rather than them having to work with every state's power of attorney form, they've got clients everywhere, and can we possibly do this? And so that was pitched to the Uniformity Committee. They agreed, and in a fairly short amount of time, we're able to work on that and put something together. And that was a practitioner, coming forward. And another one,
I think for one, it's Colorado. did adopt that uniform POA. We don't do much when it comes to uniformity. It takes us a while to figure it out, but Colorado, I do believe, was
Yeah.
one of those adopters. So
Yeah. So
shout out to
that's one,
Colorado.
but another one I would point to that's been very successful is when the federal government, when the law passed to put in place the new partnership taxation and auditing regime, and the ABA tax committee and the AICPA came forward to the MTC and said, this is going to trickle through when they put in place this new auditing regime, and when there are adjustments, then those are going to flow through to states that conform. And so we should have something that is a model that that the states can look at and adopt, and so that's been a very successful project, which states are still looking at, but quite a few states have picked that up and run with it. So it's like I said, the ideas can come from members, but also from outside the organization when people come forward and say, because again, that's one of the unique things about the MTC. We are the one organization that has the resources and has the infrastructure and a process to develop these kinds of projects. But it's primarily member driven. And then if the standing subcommittee, makes a recommendation, and then the full uniformity committee will vote. And so the process we've been following at this point is, once there's a approval from the uniformity committee, then they've established work groups to really focus on the individual projects. So, right now we've got 3 really meaty uniformity projects that are multi-year that will continue for a while, if not, quite frankly, maybe forever. I kind of joke about that, but not necessarily. In that, on the sales and use tax side, I've mentioned the taxation of digital products, which is a great opportunity to study that developing area of law that, as we see through this current legislative session in the states, more states are trying to look at that and are saying and realizing that if they want to expand their sales tax base for whatever reason, digital is a place to look. And I'm not, in our place at the MTC, we don't advocate for taxing one thing or another. As we are the how people. If you want to do it, we are hoping to develop good models that show you how to do it well and do it right. But that's been a great project that started in 2021. And then on the income tax side, we have taxation of partnerships, which is just a huge project. One that's kind of the one where I feel like may just be forever, that that's just not going to go away anytime soon. Again, this one very complex area of law, where part of what we, for example, have found as staff is that in a lot of the departments of revenue, the tax staff there just don't have a strong grounding in partnership law, and it's very complex anyway at the federal level, let alone trying to figure out sourcing and apportionment issues at the state level. And so that's one of those really important projects where looking at different facets of taxation of partnership, also providing the states with training so that their staff can hopefully learn more and have a stronger foundation to handle the issues that come before them. And then the third project we're working on, also on the income tax side, is looking back at some of our models in terms of sourcing or apportionment and services that we haven't looked at for a while. Even when you're in the Department of Revenue, of course, every once in a while you need to look back at your old rules and keep those as fresh as you can. So this is a project we thought we had sufficient staff and time, and was a desire of the Uniformity Committee to look back at some of our model statutes on sourcing of services and make sure they're as up to date as they can be.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure, the taxation of partnerships kind of uniformity project got a nice little wrench with the pass-through entity tax, SALT parity workaround, all of that is, from a practitioner perspective, really difficult And then also something that we could put a lot of effort into that could potentially go away due to the sunset of the cap. So it's right.
Yeah.
It's state and local tax is a very dynamic field, right? Where, like you said, we thought we had a pretty good feel on something. Things change. Who knew that, some tech genius was going to come out with this new product and have to figure out what to do with it. So
Right.
there's one thing about state and local tax is it is not a static industry. It's not a static profession, as we are constantly evolving and figuring out how to kind of, unfortunately kind of catch up once things are done.
Well, that was another one of those things that I took away from my experience at going back to the Texas Controller's office, is that working for a Department of Revenue is really a window on the economy in which you operate, because taxes, impact all facets of the economy. And so when legislatures make choices about how they're going to structure tax policy, sometimes it's to try and benefit the growth of a certain industry in that economy, maybe to try and curtail certain aspects of the economy by imposing taxes. But as you said, it's just ever changing, and the states, as we well know, are always a little behind the curve. But that's another thing that I'm mindful of now with my work at the MTC, and going back to the compact language. One of the powers that is specifically identified in the compact is the ability to study taxes and tax policy systems. And I think more and more that's a lot about what these, the taxation of digital products and the taxation of partnerships in particular. If you really think about it, the essence to me of those projects are studying these areas to see, okay, what's going on in the economy on this front? What are the states doing or not doing? And how, collectively with, again, that stakeholder input, can we perhaps, make recommendations that will help everybody do it more easily, whether it's administering taxes or complying with them. And so that aspect of studying, taxes and tax policy, to me is a real hallmark of what we're doing these days in terms of our work at the Commission.
Well, Nancy, I think that's a perfect place to wrap, and we really appreciate the work that you're doing at the MTC. I'm sure Tram, as a constituent of the state of Texas, appreciates what you did in your time with the Texas AG and at the Comptroller's office, and just really appreciate your time and the work that you're doing. And thank you so much for being with us here today.
Oh, thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
And this has been SALTovation. Till next time. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended, nor should it be relied upon as legal, tax, accounting, or investment advice. You should consult with a competent professional to discuss specifics of your situation and the applicability of the information presented.